I want to welcome you all to today's webinar, Ace the Interview, Interview Strategies That Get Results. Today's presenter will be Ingrid Goldbloom Bloch, and we're so happy to have her, and happy to have co-sponsorship from both the Hiatt Career Center and the Heller School's Career Development Center on today's webinar. My name is Alexandra Stevens, and I'll be moderating today's webinar, taking your questions through the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel, and also helping to launch some polls so that Ingrid can get to know you a little bit better. So to tell you a little bit more about Ingrid, she has over 20 years of combined experience in corporate marketing with Fortune 500 companies and career counseling with individuals and groups across a wide range of industries. She's recognized for her ability to ignite career confidence in the people she works with. Through her business, Mosaic Careers, and in her role as a career consultant with the Heller School for Social Policy and Management here at Brandeis, Ingrid brings her unique blend of career development training, counseling psychology, and marketing expertise. She's a trained group facilitator and presenter and has extensive experience speaking on the topic of successful interviewing strategies, which I know is why you are all here. So Ingrid, so happy to have you here in my office on this beautiful spring day at Brandeis.
Thank you so much.
So take it away.
Yeah, thank you, and hello and welcome, and thank you so much for sharing your lunch hour with me. As Alexandra mentioned, I do speak on a variety of career development topics, but I have to say that teaching interview strategies is one of my absolute favorites, and I really look forward to spending the next hour with you, giving you some tips and strategies to help you get results that you might not normally get if you're just preparing on your own. So throughout my presentation, as Alexandra mentioned, I'm going to be asking you some questions, and in turn, feel free to type in your questions so as I go along, we can do our best to answer you, and if not, we'll be answering at the end of the presentation. So I'm going to launch my first question with Alexandra.
Yeah, so this is a true or false question, just to take the pulse of the audience here. True or false, the person with the most skills and education is usually hired for the job. If you all can just take 2 seconds to weigh in, we will share the results with you as well. So 5 more seconds. We want to get 100% participation. You guys are a really interactive group, I can tell that already. And I'm going to go ahead and close that poll now and share the results with all of you. So Ingrid, it looks like 81% said false, but 19% said true. So very interesting.
So what I wanted to say to you is that, let me get you back to my full screen with my beautiful colors. There we go. That how a person presents themselves, how they connect with an interviewer, how likable they are all factors on why somebody might get hired. So the correct answer is false. So for the next hour, I'm going to teach you how to clearly articulate the match between an organization's needs and your qualifications. Other factors in getting hired is that you look professional, you have a pleasant demeanor, you're knowledgeable about an organization and the position that you're applying for. Do you convey enthusiasm? And do you just connect with the interviewer right off the bat? And some of you might know this experience from maybe going on a blind date or meeting somebody at a party. You know right away if you like them or not. So I'll give you some strategies on how to be as likable as possible. And actually next month's webinar with Annie Kipp is on how to build up your personal and professional presence, so you'll get more help in that area. So let's get started. So today I'm going to take you through the interview preparation, which really is 90% of doing well in an interview. We're going to look at interviewing questions, and I'll cover some of the tough interview questions that people tell me they have a difficult time with. Questions like, so tell me about yourself, the salary question, your weaknesses, and I'll give you some strategies for answering a whole variety of questions. Then we'll put it all together. I'll talk to you about the in-person interview along with some web-based interview strategies and talk to you about what the differences are between the full interview and screening interviews, and then how to follow up after your interview. And of course, we'll have time for questions and answers. So before the interview, This is really the key part of doing well in an interview. 90% of being successful in the actual interview is spending time in this part, the preparation. And then practicing answers beforehand are going to help you be comfortable when it comes time in the actual interview. So I encourage you to really, really do your research. There's 4 key tasks that you're going to need to do. Researching an organization, preparing for that salary question, analyzing a job description in relation to your own qualifications, and finally, developing stories that demonstrate your knowledge and experience. And if you're able to do that well, you're going to have a great shot at getting the job offer. In addition, it's important to understand the logistics of where you're going to be interviewing and also planning your appearance. In addition to what I talked to you about today, I'm going to have Alexandra send out a before interview checklist that has a whole range of reminders of what you can do to be prepared, everything from remembering to turn off your cell phone to maybe doing a drive-by so you don't get lost on the day of an interview. So how do you research an organization? Long before you walk into the door of an interview, this is really where you need to spend time learning about the organization, learning about the work that they do, the products, projects that they work on, and the people. You can do research on who's going to be interviewing you. You may be asked, why are you interested in working for us? Or what do you know about our company? And you really need to be ready. One way to set yourself apart also is to dig deeper than just a typical Google search. So yes, everybody can look on Google, look on the company website. I encourage you to see what other Brandeis alumni might have worked at this organization. You can go through the LinkedIn connections feature on LinkedIn to find alumni. Look at the company's Twitter, Facebook page. Really look at all the web-based areas that are available to you. Then go into LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a wonderful way to research the people you're going to be interviewing with, seeing where they might have worked. Maybe you guys did an internship at the same place, just spread out 20 years apart. Or maybe if you're a graduate student that's dialed in today, maybe you went to the same undergraduate program. Or maybe, who knows, you have the same kind of interest in golf. It allows you to know a little bit more about who might be interviewing you, and it gives you sort of a heads up when it's time to make a connection at the beginning when you actually have your interview. One strategy for really standing out is researching full text articles. And what full text articles allow you to do is understand more about an organization within the industry they work. A good example is if you're looking for a job, let's say at Reebok. Believe it or not, there are business journals called shoe and boot industry journals. And if you go to a reference librarian and ask for full text articles on the organization you're working for, you'll be able to find news articles when they've been quoted and a lot more about the industry to be able to weave in your knowledge when you actually have the interview. The next key piece is being able to be prepared for that salary question. One of the main places that people fail is if they aren't prepared when asked about their salary requirements. They either have unrealistic expectations of what they want to make, or they have no idea of what they should ask for, and they wing it in the middle of an interview question, which is not a good way to set yourself up for negotiating later. So it's up to you to do enough research so you can answer the question about the salary from a position of knowledge. It's not, as I said again, a place where you want to turn to the hiring manager or human resource person to fill in the blanks. So how do you do this? Do informational interviewing. Talk to other people in your field and ask them, you might not say how much money do you make, but you could say what is a typical range for this position. Find other alumni working at that organization and benchmark. Does your organization pay competitively with the rest of the market? And here's one good place where you can actually sit in your pajamas and do some interviewing prep, which is online. And so here's a few places that I like to go to that Alexandra recommends as well that will give you some benchmarks. And I encourage you to look at them all so you get a nice range. I'll talk to you more about how to answer that salary question when we get to actually the interview part. So put that aside for now. So you've done your research on the organization, you've done your research on salaries, and the next key piece is really understanding the job, establishing the match between the organization's needs and your qualifications. So the first thing you need to do is look up that job description, analyze the job description for what they're asking for, take a step back and say, what 4 or 5 key areas are most important in this job? You might have already done this when you were looking to write a targeted cover letter or changing up your resume to make it targeted. But this here, if I say nothing else for the entire hour, is the key to being successful in your interview. Spending that time to get out a piece of paper, doing the 2-column approach, their needs and your qualifications. So I'm going to take you through an actual client of mine, and then I'm going to use that job description for the rest of my presentation for the actual interview questions. So what's really important, as I said, is being prepared to answer questions about which skills you have that match the needs of the organization and be as focused as possible. So this person had a job as a wetlands education director. Now, for those of you who are not from the US, you might not know what the wetlands is, but it's just an environmental education director job. And I'm going to throw in something that I meant to say at the beginning. Everything I'm teaching you today is based on the US market. Looking for a job in the US market, one of the key factors in being successful in interviewing is actually being comfortable promoting yourself and speaking about your accomplishments and skills. In our country, it is not considered rude. It is a necessary component to being hired. So that's what I'm going to be taking you through now. So you take this job, it's the Wetlands Education Director, and my client analyzed their needs and was able to identify from looking at the job description, but also speaking with other people doing similar jobs and alumni that had worked there in the past, that they really had 4 key needs. Somebody with teaching experience, someone with communication skills, training experience, and research experience. The next thing that my client did, and you will do when you're looking at your own job that you're analyzing, is pull out your resume and find those accomplishments that describe things that you've done that can prove that you have the experiences the organization's looking for. So in this case, the teaching experience went directly to their experience as a TA teaching biology. They had many areas in their resume demonstrating strong communication skills, but for the purposes of being prepared for an interview, they picked 2 key ones where they designed education programs and also where they led strategic and important meetings. And you're going to continue to do this for each one of these bullets. One of the questions I get is, how many bullets? Is it really 4, 5, 6? Just have your talking points. And the reason you need to do this is you might get an interviewer that isn't qualified to interview. Sometimes they're new, they're nervous at interviewing. You'll get a whole range of interviewers. And as the interview takes place, and I will get into this in more detail, you need to have the structure in your mind that at the end of the day, I need to make sure that I get these 5 points across. If I can prove that I can do these 5 things, they will see how nicely I fit into the requirements of the job. Now, here's how you can stand out a little bit more. Identify your market differentiator. And I'm drawing on my marketing background to talk to you about this. What a market differentiator is that bonus skill or competency that you bring to the position. So in addition to the requirements of the job, what sets you apart? What else do you have? For example, if you're an international student looking for a job in the US market, maybe you've lived in a lot of other countries and you have a wonderful global business perspective, or you speak foreign languages, or maybe you're looking for a nonprofit job but you've worked in the for-profit industry. So for me, my market differentiator is that I have not only counseling and career development experience, but I also have marketing experience. So I'm able to help people market and promote themselves in a really competitive marketplace. This is a good piece of information to also have if you're asked, well, why should we hire you? So you can tell them, well, I have the skills that you're looking for, and you'll list them like we just did. And in addition, I also bring you X. My final visual for understanding your market differentiator is think about watching television late at night when you can't sleep at 2 in the morning, and there's some infomercial that's on, and they'll say, if you order now, you'll also get this Ginsu knife or a free shopping bag. So I always say to people, what is your Ginsu knife? What is your market differentiator? And if you're a senior at a higher senior level looking for another job, this can really make the difference of helping you get hired or not. Okay, so let's move on to the actual interviewing questions, preparing for the interview, being ready for some of those tough interview questions. So today's interviews are all behavioral interviewing type questions. And what behavioral interviews have in common is that they believe that past performance will dictate future performance. And they're used in all types of interviews. So if you can prove, if you can successfully show that you've, for example, managed conflict in an old job and turned a situation full of conflict around, the belief is that you'll be able to manage conflict in your future job. Additionally, if you've handled, maybe your job is as a sales manager, if you've successfully built a sales team, you'll successfully build a sales team in the future. Questions that you'll get asked that will be sort of an alert that you're being asked a behavioral interview question are things like, so tell me about a time when, or can you give me an example of? The belief is that giving examples, telling stories, giving a nice picture around your performance will help the help the interviewer imagine you in the role. So the better able you are at describing your competencies and your skills in terms of stories, the better able they will be in imagining you in the future position. The good news is the May webinar is with Tricia Griffin-Carty, and she teaches you how to tell wonderful stories, how to turn your accomplishments into stories, and she has her own version of a technique that I'm about to teach you called the STAR technique, but please dial in May. So this will be a continuation on my interviewing webinar. So behavioral interviewing will take place in all different types of interviews: web-based, panel, screening, case interviews, phone interviews, in-person interviews, group interviews. It is just the way people have been trained to ask questions, and it's very effective. So one way to prepare for these behavioral interviews is to develop your own stories. So a few slides back, I had you look at an organization's needs and your own qualifications. And my client had identified communication skills, teaching experience, research experience. There was one more. And for each one of those skills, it's important to then develop a story around your accomplishments to prove in a very vibrant and colorful way that you can do the job. So the STAR technique is really the strategic framework, and it's going to allow you to stay on topic, and it's going to be focused, and it will allow you to tell everything in a really compelling way. Some of you might have heard of this in terms of PAR, problem action result, or CAR, challenge action result. It's all the same, really. You're creating the situation, and you're stating it's sort of a brief setup of what you're going to talk about. Then you talk about the task, and the task is setting the stage. Excuse me. It's an explanation of what problem or challenge you were facing. And then the action. What steps did you take, and what was the result of the action? You've already done part of this when you were writing your resume. If you have written a targeted resume, each description of your job would have accomplishment statements stating an action. What did you do at each job, and what is the result of the action? So for an interview, what you're doing is adding in those first two pieces, setting the stage with the situation and the task. So let me give you a few examples in a minute, because most interview questions you'll be able to use the STAR technique, and there'll be other interview questions like the general questions about salary or your background or why you're interested in the job where you won't be able to use the STAR technique. So the next phase in preparing for an interview is really understanding that interview questions sort of fall into three key areas. There's going to be general questions like, so tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in this position? What are your salary expectations? There's going to be questions about your qualifications. Tell me about your management style, your experience with a core competency, what are your strengths? And the questions about your qualifications are going to depend on your level and the type of industry that you're in. So if you're in a more technical field, you're going to be asked really detailed questions about your qualifications. You might even be asked to solve a problem on the spot. Where if it's an entry-level job, it might be general questions about your administrative skills and your background. And then there's the third set of questions that I call challenge questions. And these are the questions about your weaknesses, conflict that you might have had with a boss. Sometimes you're going to be asked what will be the biggest challenge for you on this job? What area, when you're looking at the job description, do you think will give you the most trouble? Again, if you go back to the exercise I gave you where you're analyzing the job description, looking at the company's needs and your qualifications for your own private use, that would be a good time to see, do they have any needs or expectations that you don't have? Because you'll be ready to answer some of those challenge questions if you're able to analyze what might be some of your weaknesses. So this could be a good time to take a couple questions if you have any. There are any questions coming in that I can answer?
We don't have any questions in right now, so we can continue moving on, but it is a good opportunity just to remind all of you that you can, as you think of a question, use your question box in the GoToWebinar control panel to submit that, and we will try to get to as many as we possibly can in the Q&A section.
Great. Okay, thank you. So let's move on. So here's one of the typical questions that everybody's going to be asked, whether you're a senior level manager or entry level. So tell me about yourself. And I'll tell you that this is probably one of the hardest questions to answer, because where do you start? People want to know where you grew up. How many brothers and sisters? What do you talk about? What part of your resume do you talk about? So I'm going to give you a structure that's very successful and will allow you to stay focused. Because what people are really looking for when they ask you about yourself are three things. Can you carry the ball? Are you organized and structured? And you speak about something that's appropriate, that allows the interviewer to imagine you in the role. So for Tell Me About Yourself, it's a brief overview of your skills and experience in relation to the position. So don't start talking about where you grew up. Don't start talking about a whole walkthrough of your resume if some of the jobs have nothing to do with what you're going to be doing. Really start with an overview of your skills and experience in relation to the position. And again, that analysis of an organization's needs and your qualifications will help prepare you to know what skills to highlight. The next phase of Tell Me About Yourself is to throw in, and the reason I'm so interested in this position is, and then you immediately start talking about what it was that attracted you to answer this job posting. And then you can throw in something personal, and you'd say on a personal note, and you throw in something that's appropriate for the job that you're interviewing for. So way, way back when, maybe 20 years ago, I was in an improv comedy group. And that is a good personal note to throw in if I'm doing stand-up training, because it shows more about my skills in relation to the job, that I can think on my feet and that I feel comfortable speaking before groups. So I'm going to walk you through how somebody might articulate this answer from the job as the Wetlands Education Director. And feel free to type in questions as I go, but please listen for my intonation, where I pause, what I highlight, and ask yourself, do I sound excited? Do I sound interested in the position? Do I seem knowledgeable about the core competencies that are required for this job? So I would say, they'd say, so tell me about yourself. And I'd say, well, I have 8 years of research, teaching, and community outreach experience in the field of ecology, and with a particular interest in wetlands. I love teaching, and I'm excited that I recently won an award for creating a multi-sensory education experience for grades 1 through 8. I am so passionate about educating people about environmental issues, and I have been involved in wetland ecology from the time, I'd have to say, that I collected my first frog from a pond when I was 6 years old. The reason I am so interested in this position is it would draw upon my best skills, which are teaching, mentoring, and public speaking. I know I could contribute immediately to your need for curriculum development, and I'm so excited to develop new programs on wetlands education for your center. You know, on a personal note, I also volunteer with sight-impaired adults to take them out into nature so they can use their other senses to learn about ecology. And then you pause. If you didn't cover something, if they want to know more about your background, they'll ask. It's better to be concise and focused on the skills that you've identified that they need versus rambling and going off in tangents. So,
speaking of rambling and going off in tangents, we do have just a quick question I thought was relevant. Is there a time limit that you should keep your tell me about yourself answer to?
Great question, Alexandra. I would say under 2 minutes. So I know that you've been practicing because you're at the stage of getting an interview where you have that 30-second elevator pitch. This would be your elevator pitch plus. So 2 minutes is sort of the standard. Great question. And don't go crazy thinking it has to be exactly 2 minutes. Also, in terms of being able to answer these questions, prepare for these questions, I know that at Hiatt there's a wonderful alumni page, resource page on interviewing, and there's actually something called Interview Stream, which Alexandra can tell a little bit about, that they can, that you all can dial in and practice your interviewing live. You can record yourself, you can customize your questions, and you can listen back. So that's a good one to practice. Tell me about yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. So Interview Stream is something that any alum can sign up for and get access to, and it allows you to answer sample questions in real time using a webcam on your computer or your iPad or your iPhone, and then you can watch yourself back. You can time yourself, you can re-record yourself, and really simulate a real interview experience. So great resource to bring up.
Good, thank you. So let's do our next poll as we move on to the salary question.
So our next question is another true or false question, and that is, true or false, it's best to bring up salary and benefits in an interview to be sure you are on the same page with the interviewer. So if you all could just take a quick moment to weigh in, should you bring up salary during the interview? This is a toughie. Give you 5 more seconds. Such a participatory group. I love you guys. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share the results with all of you. So, Ingrid, it looks like 76% said false, and 24% said true. So, who is right?
Actually, the 76% false. Your goal is to not start negotiating at this time. Let me get you out of my black and white screen again. Having a few colorful issues. There we go. And the goal is to not start negotiating at this time. Negotiating should only happen when a formal job offer occurs. So this is not the time to negotiate. This is the time for you to focus on if the opportunity is the right fit for you and learning more about the position. At the same time, an organization is going to want to ask you your salary requirements because they're wondering if they can afford you. They're also wondering if you've done your research and you have realistic expectations, and they're going to see if you're in the ballpark or if they should screen you out. So here's how I would approach the salary question. You try to defer once, as I mentioned earlier, this is not the time to start negotiating. It's important to negotiate, and that will be another webinar or topic for another day, but that happens at the formal offer. Don't get stuck in negotiating. Focus on fit. Is this the right fit for you? Are you the right fit for them? So what do? I'm actually going to give you some language. I've had clients and other students I've worked with use this, and it's very successful. So whether they say to you, how much were you making, a direct question, or an indirect question, what are you hoping to make, or what are your salary expectations, I would always try answering it this way to begin. You know, what's most important to me is to find the right fit. I know that there's all types of compensation packages out there, and I trust that you're competitive. What is the range for this position? If you're lucky, they'll give you a range and you say thank you and you just move on, ask a different question. If they're a good interviewer and they've been trained well, or they're human resources, they're not going to answer. They're going to push back and say, we really need to hear from you what your expectations are, or what. And this is when you show your research, which was my second slide of the presentation. So you'd say, my research shows, or you could say, after speaking with other people in the field and looking at salary calculators online, my research shows that the range for this type of position is between X and Y. Is that within your range? And then they'll answer, and you say, great, and you move on. So don't get stuck in that salary negotiation at that time. So I'm going to take you through just a couple more ways to answer some of these tough interview questions. And as I mentioned, there are many, many different questions that you can find either online or through the interview stream or through the Hiatt alumni resource page. But I'd like to take you through how to answer at least the strengths and weaknesses. So for strengths, you want to be prepared to talk about 3 strengths and prepare a star story. Remember, strategy or situation, task, action, result for every strength that you mention, because you need to prove that you actually have the strength. So if I tell you I have a great communication skills, why are you going to believe me? You'll only believe me if I can give you some stories that show examples of where I've used my communication skills in the past. So select strengths that directly relate to the core competencies of the job. Again, you've done the analysis, you've looked at the job description. List 3 strengths. So you'll rattle off 3 strengths. And then you actually say verbatim, you know, my strength is this, and let me give you an example. So I've outlined below for you different ways that you can answer the strengths. I'm not going to read you every single one of my answers as I go on, but you'll have this webinar, you'll have my Prezi presentation, and you can go back and look at it and tweak it to match you. So you mention your skills, then you give a story, and let me give you an example. You use the STAR technique to explain how you've used the skills, and then you give a result of you using the skills. Now, in this example, they were able to weave in all 3 of their skills, their communication, their presentation, and their curriculum development skills. Nothing is wrong with doing it 3 times. So saying, I have strong communication skills, and let me give you an example. You tell your STAR story. Then I have strong presentation skills, and let me give you an example and another story. And if they want another skill or core strength, you do it again.
I think that's just such a great point, Ingrid, because really as interviewers, you know, you may be the 5th interview they're having that day. And so while it might seem repetitious to say, and let me give you an example each time, you're really coaching your interviewer through the interview too. So they're going to feel like you're helping them out because you're making yourself a lot easier to understand.
Thank you. And that is one of the key tips when I said strategies that get results is give examples. The more you can give examples, the more you can tell stories, the easier it will be for the interviewer to imagine you in that new role. So here's the dreaded weakness question. And people are afraid, what is your greatest weakness? It's sort of a question that nobody ever quite knows how to prepare to answer. But there is a difference between honesty and brutal honesty. Nobody's going to make you take a lie detector test. So here's a strategy for answering. Be sure that you do not pick a core competency of the job. When you've done your analysis of what they're looking for, Don't choose something that will have anything to do with your ability to do the job. The other is don't couch your weakness as a strength. One of the most annoying things to people that have interviewed, and actually Alexandra and I were speaking about this very question yesterday, is when people say, well, I'm a perfectionist, or I just love to take on so many tasks. I'm just the last one at work every day. People can see right through that. It's annoying. It shows that you really haven't looked at yourself and chosen a weakness that's appropriate. What the employer is trying to figure out is if your weakness will make it hard for you to do a good job and fit in with the organization. They're also interested in how you handle a tough interview question, to be honest. So here's a two-part answer, and it's a strategy where you give a confession, you state the weakness, and then the recovery. What are you doing to improve upon this weakness? So in this example, and I actually love this weakness because people can relate to it, it's the ability to speak in public. Many people have a difficult time standing before large groups, speaking in public. It's not something that comes naturally, especially if you're an introvert. So this is how this person answered. But what are you doing about it? They say, I'm aware that I need to increase my comfort level, and I've joined Toastmasters International to learn public speaking skills and have a form to practice. And then they give an example actually of how well they're now doing. So it's not even as much of a weakness anymore. In fact, my last practice speech went really well. And while I was shaking on the inside, still demonstrating your weakness, I was told no one noticed. So go through your weaknesses and pick more than one. I've had experiences where somebody asks for a weakness and then they say, well, give me another one, and then somebody's not prepared. So prepare for a couple of weaknesses. Hopefully they'll only ask you one. And then I have another question that I'm not going to go into in detail that I have on my slides for you, which will be the conflict question. So this is the same way to answer if you've had conflict with a boss or conflict with a vendor. But remember, structure it using the STAR technique, focus on the work, not the interpersonal conflict, and show how you improved the situation. And here I take you through sort of that three-step STAR approach for you to come back to and read later. So now we're moving on, and we have about 20 minutes left, and we're going to put it all together. So you've done your research, you've researched the organization, you've researched the salaries, you've anticipated the questions you might be asked, you've done an analysis of the job description, you've looked at what you think your core competencies are that relate to the job, you've come up with stories. There's a lot of work that goes into doing interview preparation, but you've come up with the stories, and maybe you've even practiced on Interview Stream, you've practiced to other people. But as I mentioned, 90% of what you do to be successful in interviewing happens before you actually have to put it all together. So when you're putting it all together, as I mentioned earlier, there's all types of behavioral interviewing that will take place in all types of interviews. But today I'm going to focus on the screening interview, web-based interviews, and in-person interviews. So the screening interview. Human resources versus the hiring manager. This is the first step in which somebody's going to speak to you on the phone, and it's usually a short interview, maybe 20 minutes, sometimes 30 minutes, and it's with human resources. So it's somebody looking for red flags. There's so many qualified candidates. The pool is so good that they are looking for reasons to screen you out. They want to make sure that your salary is in range. They're doing a quick qualifications check. And they want to listen for, do you know what this job is? Are you enthusiastic for the position? So this is really your first way to get through showing that you understand the job, that you understand how you fit into the job, and preparing for a screening interview, even though it might not be as detailed, or the actual screening interview might not be as detailed as it would be when you're speaking with a hiring manager, be prepared to answer all of the questions. So don't think to yourself, I'll prepare for the screening interview, and if they invite me back, then I'll do my research. Be ready with all your notes right then and there. So what do you do on a screening interview? It's on the phone. So they don't, just like me right now, all I have to rely on is my voice. You can't see me. You can't, there's no give and take. We can't look at each other's body language. So smile into the phone. I'm smiling right now into into my computer at you, and it shows in my voice. Have your notes ready. I'm using my notes as we go along. Make sure you're in a quiet location for this screening interview. Make sure it's a good time to talk. Oftentimes, you've applied for a bunch of jobs, you might be out and about and the phone rings and it's one of the organizations you were hoping to hear from, and you're so excited that you answer the phone right then and there, and you're actually in the grocery checkout line. And also make sure there's clear reception. This is a true story, and it has to do with what I've done poorly in a screening interview where I did nothing that I've just told you to do. So I was driving my son to, he's a fencer, a fencing practice. My phone was on 7%. I hadn't charged it, and I got a call that I was hoping to get. I was so excited to get the call that I actually answered the phone. Nothing is wrong with not answering your phone. You can let it go to voicemail, but I picked up. At the same time that my 15-year-old was saying very loudly that he was starving and needed food right then. So I'm shushing him in the car. I'm mouthing for him to be quiet. I'm praying that my phone doesn't die while I'm driving and talking, so of course you shouldn't be doing that. And I drove him over to a Five Guys restaurant, which for those of you who are not from this area is a burger joint that's very loud. And I gave him money and sent him inside. And I stood outside trying to have my conversation. At that very moment, there was an accident and a police incident where there's fire trucks going by, police cars going by. It's very loud, and my phone is dying slowly. It's down to 2%. So I went into the restaurant looking for a plug. There weren't any plugs, and the only plug I could find was in the women's bathroom, which you would think would be quiet, but that's where they decided to blast in 1980s music. So I had this interview in a bathroom of a Five Guys with 1980s music blasting. I'm embarrassed to say this wasn't 20 years ago, this was 3 years ago. So here I am, a professional who should know better. But sometimes your emotions take over and you're so excited that somebody's called that you don't think clearly. So luckily I got the job because I had connections already at that organization and they knew my good work. And to this day we still laugh about this incident, and I use it in my stories of what not to do. So don't act like me. So anyway, that's a screening interview. So don't answer the phone if you're not prepared. Let's go to the web-based interviews. And a web-based interview is happening more and more now because companies don't want to fly people to them, or if it's an international organization. So prepare for the web-based interview exactly as you would for in-person. The problem with the web-based interview is you have the problem of technical interference. So you still have that extra filter. So something very simple is make sure that your account name is appropriate. Make sure that you've checked your equipment. Make sure the lighting is appropriate. So if the lighting isn't appropriate, your face isn't going to come through well. Or the angle of your computer is going to look like you're staring down at them. Or the background is distracting. In this instance, he's wearing a tight checkered shirt and the background of where he is not appropriate. So you want to wear solid colors. Make sure that it's just a nice, clean background. You're looking directly into the camera, not into the computer screen. And you have your notes off to the side, as in the last picture. So we're finally down to the in-person interview. This is what I think you've all been waiting for. And in that in-person interview, there's a structure. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'm going to ask you my final poll question right here before I get into the details of how to handle the in-person interview.
So our last poll question is another true-false. If you have difficulty finding the location of your interview, when you finally arrive, you should probably tell the receptionist that you had a tough time and ask that they update their website so that other people don't have the same issue in the future. True or false? You had a tough time. It took you a long time to get there. You're just looking out for others. What do you think? We'll give you a few more seconds, and then I will share the results with you. All right, so it looks like as much as I tried, I didn't dupe you guys. 90% said false. Don't say that. But 10% said yeah. Let them know. What do you think, Ingrid?
Well, so I will say the answer is a resounding false, and I'll tell you why. Let me go back to my colorful screen. People often ask me, when does an interview start? And an interview starts the minute you walk in the door. You are making a first impression with every single person you meet. So if you go in with a complaint telling the receptionist or whoever greets you that, wow, you know, those directions on your website were really confusing, you really need to update that, you're starting with a negative. Every interaction needs to be positive from the minute you walk into the door. So the first part of an interview is really that first impression. It's the opening. And again, next month's webinar is going to help you make that positive first impression on developing your professional presence with Annie Kipp. So the positive first impression is something as simple as eye contact, your handshake, your smile, your grooming. So that's that first quick impression that you get when you meet somebody, as I mentioned, a blind date or meeting somebody at a party. Here's an opportunity for you to also connect with the person that you're meeting with. So if you have done some research on LinkedIn, you might say, oh, I noticed from doing my research that we went to the same private high school, as you're walking from the lobby to the actual place that the interview will take place. It's a time to make some small talk. You might talk about the beautiful weather, like today, wow, it's crazy, I heard it's supposed to be 70 degrees tomorrow. Or you talk about the beautiful office surroundings, something nice and light. In the US job market, I was laughing again with Alexandra that we just can't keep our mouths shut. We cannot handle silence. So we like to fill up that space from walking from point A to point B with a little bit of small talk. So you've made the connection, and then you sit down, and then the real meat of the interview is going to begin. And the middle is where you're going to use everything you've done to prepare to demonstrate as much as you can how you fit with the organization. This is where you weave in your knowledge of the organization. It's where you talk about your accomplishments using the STAR approach. You're basically selling the match between the organization's needs and your qualifications. So you show that there's a direct fit, you show your knowledge of the job requirements, and you use your STAR stories as we've already prepared and you've practiced. The other part of this middle section is where you might ask questions. Oftentimes at the end, and I'll get to this, they'll say, do you have any questions for me? But an interview is really a two-way exchange. It's between the interviewer and you. So you don't have to sit passively by while they just ask you question after question and you answer question after question. There should be a little bit of a give and take. So they'll ask you a question or two or three, and you'll follow up with a question as well. It's often good to follow up with a question if they've asked you something tough. So if they do ask you, tell me about conflict that you've had with a team that you've worked with, and you answer the question, you might turn it around by saying, can you tell me a little bit more about some of the teams I might be working with here? So that's the middle section. At the close, you're going to reaffirm your interest. So really saying how much you're interested in the job, how you strongly believe there's a match between their needs and your the organization's needs and your qualifications. You also want to sell the match here if you have a poor interviewer. Maybe the interviewer spent the entire 40 minutes talking about the corporate culture and the organization, but they never really asked you any questions. So you might say, I just want to say again how interested I am in this position. I know we didn't have a lot of time to talk about it, but I really feel that I'm a strong candidate for this. And then you go through your 4 points that you've prepared. This is a time to also ask powerful questions. So if they say, do you have any questions for me? The questions that you ask should be directly relatable to demonstrating that you will add value to the job. This is not the time to ask about vacation or benefits or even sort of what I call weaker questions. Can you tell me more about the corporate culture? You should have learned this in your networking, or you can ask those types of questions if you get a job offer. My favorite question to ask is, what problems would you like to see me solve on the first 6 months of the job? It shows that you are looking to make a difference at the organization. Another way to ask would be, what would be my most immediate priorities? I call these power questions. And again, you can go online and look up some of these power questions. Also establish the next steps. So I'm so excited about this opportunity. I would love to come back and move this process forward. What are our next steps? So many people sit passively by and just say thank you, and they leave and they don't know what's happening. I hear from HR people also that people don't show their enthusiasm or excitement. You might be so nervous for the interview that you forget to show and tell them that you're interested. So you could say, you know, I am really interested in this position. I so enjoyed meeting with you today. I really appreciate you showing your gratitude, the time you spent. I really enjoyed talking to you more about X, Y, and Z. What are our next steps? Say it with curiosity, but also interest and enthusiasm. And then you'll shake hands, you'll find out what the follow-up procedure is, and you'll leave. So as we're ending, there's the follow-up. So you've had this great interview, and then you want to follow up. So after the interview, within 24 hours, thank everybody you met. The timing of these thank yous, as I mentioned, is 24 hours, but also do it during regular business hours. I have clients and students that I've worked with that at 2 in the morning are writing their thank you notes. Nobody wants to be woken up by their cell phone at 2 in the morning to receive your thank you. Reference something specific maybe that you spoke about. And also the question of, should I send an email versus a handwritten note? In today's world, email is absolutely fine. It's immediate. It's going to get to everybody. You know it comes. At the same time, a handwritten note is special. So I would say email everybody, but if you want to stand out and you're younger, write that handwritten note in addition. I've heard stories where people will actually show these notes around the office. They'll save it if it's on a nice card. If you're a little bit of an older worker and you're trying to not seem older, I wouldn't write a handwritten note. So let's say you're in the 50-plus crowd, just do an email. You don't want to seem old-fashioned. So it works for the younger crowd, not the older crowd. And now I'm at the part of asking any questions that you might have. And at the same time, I'm going to show 2 more slides that give you some information for next steps. I'll let Alexandra take over for a bit.
Yes, so we are getting in some excellent questions, and so I want to be able to get to as many of them as possible. So we're going to answer these in a rapid fire format. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, awesome. So first one, really quick, can you give a specific example of a market differentiator?
Yes, so as I mentioned, many people in career counseling come from a counseling background or from human resources. So my market differentiator is that I have corporate marketing experience. So I come from that sort of Fortune 500 world, and I also have a counseling background. So if people hire me in addition to strong counseling skills and in addition to having the HR perspective, I also bring years of marketing experience with Fortune 500 companies.
Okay, great. So we've gotten a few questions from a few different people about folks whose skills might not match up exactly beautifully, like your wetlands example. So they may be returning to the workforce after a gap in employment, for example, or they might be transitioning to another sector. How would the STAR technique apply to folks who are wanting to apply their transferable skills, but not necessarily direct experience?
Well, I think you bring up a good point, Alexandra, which is, are they transferable skills? So while you might, in the wetlands experience, and they're asking for, let's say, curriculum development or where have you developed workshops, maybe you haven't had experience developing workshops. But what have you developed? Where have you had to use those skills in maybe a different setting? It might be in volunteer work. It might be with your kid's school. Any part where you can give an example of where you've used the skill that is transferable, the person can imagine you using it in the new setting.
Okay, great. We also have a few questions about salary, and I think this only dictates that a salary negotiation webinar is in our future.
Okay.
I think that would be an excellent follow-up to today. So you mentioned asking, is this your range? Based on my research, is this your range? What if they say no? What happens? Is there a way to dodge that?
Yeah, so if they say no, clearly the no is probably that you're asking for something too high. But I also have questions where, what if it's too high? What if it's too low? Then you would say, oh, well, what is your range? Because I'm very interested in this position and I'm flexible. What's really most important to me is to find the right fit. So focus on your flexibility. if you're interested in the position, say, oh, I did a lot of research. I really love to learn what the range is for your organization. I'm so interested in this position. I would just love to learn more about what the job entails.
Yeah, absolutely. So focusing on flexibility is huge and a really important way to be able to dodge. So what if they insist on hearing your past salary history? Do you say still stress the flexibility piece?
Well, I think, this is another good part, because especially if you're transferring fields or your past salary, you know that you were underpaid or it was completely unrelated, you can add a little color to that. So you might say, I'm happy to share my past salary, but it doesn't really reflect what I know the range is for this position. My research shows it's from X to Y. My base salary was this, but I know that my company did not pay competitively, or I know that I'll be changing my skills, and I've now acquired a graduate degree, so I'm really looking to be in the range of X to Y.
Excellent. So last salary question.
We definitely do need a salary workshop.
So how would you reply if an interviewer questions or doubts your salary research? How do you defend it if necessary? So for example, are Glassdoor and Salary.com viewed as credible by HR professionals? I think that they are. I was chatting with a few of the listeners just now, and Glassdoor.com is directly from the mouth of current and former employees at a company. So they are reporting presumably honestly about their work, and certainly if you've done informational interviews and other research of that kind, you should be pretty well on track. If you're not, the interview is a great opportunity to learn about that.
And I would absolutely agree, which is why I gave so many different resources for doing your online research, and why it's also important to check that out with other alumni that have worked at an organization if you can, and doing your informational interviews. So the more data points you have, the more accurate you'll be.
This is a really great question about trying to tease out of the job description what are the core needs. So job descriptions, especially technical ones, can be overly broad. What tips do you have to find the core needs to match your skills against?
So again, and I know we always come back as career development professionals, the importance of networking. So number one, the more information you can get from actual people that have worked in similar positions or at the organization where you can have some informational interviews, the better. The other is really looking at not only this job description, but you can also type in similar job titles, look up LinkedIn for other jobs, and maybe pull up 4 or 5 jobs with the same type of requirements and see if you can line them up if they're asking for the same types of things for overlap. But oftentimes they'll say required, required and preferred, and then it'll say responsibilities include. And so one piece of advice I have is to look at, is what they're looking for something really general, like ability to get along well with teams or to work on deadline and under pressure, or are they asking for something very specific, like if a technical application? I know that a new programming language that's really hot right now is R. And so really looking at what is core versus sort of general language. But I know I'm sort of dancing around this because it's a tough one if you don't also have the experience of speaking with other people. Alexandra, do you have any ideas on that one as well?
Yeah, no, I think what you said is absolutely right.
Looking up other job descriptions, talking to as many people as you can, yes, and really separating out what's a requirement versus preferred.
Absolutely. So we've gotten a couple questions about this one. I think it's a great question because, my obsession with LinkedIn. But what about viewing interviewers on LinkedIn? They can see that you've looked at their profile, and some of the viewers have been sketched out by that. I, on the other hand, think it's a great thing, and we've had recruiters come into our office before and talk to us and say that they are delighted when they see an interviewee has checked their profile, because it shows that you are doing that homework.
I absolutely 100% agree. It shows that you're doing the research. It's expected. So people are afraid, I don't want to come across as stalkery, or I don't want to look like I'm snooping. In today's interview marketplace, people expect you to do research. People expect you to have a good LinkedIn. I think if you have a poor LinkedIn and you're looking at somebody, that could go against you. So make sure that your LinkedIn profile is something that you're proud of. So if somebody sees that you looked at them, they also have the opportunity to look at your profile. The other opportunity it has to make you stand out is if they're interviewing 7 people and you're the one that looked at them, they're going to look at you again, look at your qualifications again, and you'll be more top of mind. So in fact, it's a strategy, a hope that they know that you've looked at them.
So in the spirit of keeping to time, it is 1 o'clock. We are getting so many great questions streaming in, and we really had a record number of registrants for this webinar, so we're so pleased. But this will be the last question, but I'll definitely be reaching out to you folks individually to make sure your individual questions are answered. But last question, in the spirit of saying thank you, so thank you, Ingrid. This has been great.
Thank you for having me.
If you do a panel interview, so if you're being interviewed by several people, can all thank you notes be similar? What would be your tips for differentiating each one?
Great question. And I'm going to quickly throw in something that you didn't ask, which is in preparing for the interview, make sure that you look up every single person that's going to be on the panel and speak to what matters to them. So in the thank you note, each person on the panel is going to be in charge of a different department, is going to have a different job function. So I would not do sort of a cut and paste. They might share that thank you note. Yes, it'll be the same when you're appreciating them for their time and efforts in interviewing you, but then speak to one of the questions that they asked you, or you might say, I know we didn't have the opportunity to speak about this during the interview, but I'm excited about X, where you're mentioning something that has to do with their specific job function. Think about what matters to the person receiving that thank you note.
That's a great point, and know that they're probably going to be forwarding your email to other folks on the committee saying, look, I got to thank you for this person, and you don't necessarily want it to look exactly the same. Great point.
And again, I'm sure that there's resources out there to help you craft your thank you notes on the different Hiatt career websites.
So thank you all so much for joining us. Ingrid, if you could just go back to the previous slide just briefly. Quick next steps, please fill out our satisfaction survey to let us know how we did today. We want to hear from you. This webinar program is based on what your interests are and the career topics that you want to hear about. So you'll have an opportunity to not only rate today's presentation, but to also suggest topics for the future, which I presume salary negotiation will be one of them. We also hope you'll join us for our April 7th webinar, which is called Insider Secrets to a Powerful Professional Presence. And that's really going to delve into some of the intricacies of what goes into a professional presence, from how you talk to how you look to what you're wearing, and certainly those are all connected to the interview as well. We also encourage you to join us on LinkedIn. There is a Brandeis University Career Connections group on LinkedIn open to all Brandeis students and alumni. It's a great place to be able to connect with one another and continue to ask career-related questions. And then lastly, I want to remind you, if you are an undergraduate alum or student, you get free career services for life through the Hiatt Career Center. And this includes one-on-one advising appointments as well. So just something to keep in mind. And I also wanted to make sure you all have my contact information as well as the contact information for the Hiatt Career Center. You all will be receiving a copy of this presentation later on this afternoon, within a couple hours, as soon as I can upload it online. And you'll also get the link to Ingrid's wonderful Prezi as well. So you can reference that question that we didn't have time to get into. And you'll also be getting a link to the interview preparation checklist. So this has been a lot for the last 64 minutes, but I hope you found it helpful. Thank you so much, Ingrid, for spending your lunch hour with us today.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure, and good luck on all of your interviews. Just keep practicing.
Wonderful. And again, if you have any further questions, please be in touch. You have my contact info, and in the survey as well, you can ask any follow-up questions you may have. Thank you, and have a great rest of your day, and happy spring from us here at Brandeis.